Hi, everyone. We're here. Thank you for joining us today on The Same Drugs. This is my friend who I can't stop calling Posie, but that's not her real name. What do you prefer? Do you care?
I don't care. I quite like Posie. I don't mind. Whatever you want.
Okay, well, I'm going to go with Posie, and then you can go with Kellie-Jay, and other people can just go with whatever they like.
It's a bit like pronouns. I rarely use my own name.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. It is a bit like pronouns, and like, ironically, you don't lose your mind when people call you a different name than what's your actual name. I don't care, for example, if people forget to put the H in my name. I don't even think I would really care that much if people like called me by a different name. At least I wouldn't fall apart into a million pieces or die or anything like that.
Well, it might cause other deaths. You just don't know.
I mean, I'm pretty tough. So are you. So that helps. Um, so, how's everyone doing out there? I hope that they can see and hear us properly. In my mouth. That's better. So, if you are joining us and you're wanting to comment or ask questions, you do need to use the live chat. I'm not going to be monitoring the comments below the video or comments and questions on Patreon. So if you're watching on Patreon right now, you have to actually click through to the YouTube video on YouTube, join the live chat. And I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. But if you really want me to see your question and ask the question, use the super chat. And also, you should probably subscribe to this channel. I notice other people on YouTube say things like that. So once every 6 months, I remember to say, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Right. So I wanted to have you on. I mean, I love having you on. I love talking to you about a myriad of things, of course. But as you know, there was a recent incident in Virginia wherein a boy in a skirt raped a girl. I think she was in grade 9 or something like that in the washroom. And it was covered up. It was covered up by the school board, by the superintendent, and parents obviously got really angry about that. The father of the girl was arrested for, I don't know, daring to make a stink at the school board meeting about the fact that his daughter was raped at school, and then the school tried to cover it up. Have you been following this story?
Yeah, he actually went. They were going to push through the policy, weren't they, of gender neutral, and it sort of came up at that meeting that his daughter had been assaulted. But then I think what they also uncovered at that meeting is the boy had done it before in another school in similar situations, using the girls' changing rooms or toilets. It's just a little bit mind-boggling that. Well, it's not, is it? I mean, we know, don't we? We know actually sexual assault and Me Too means something unless it kind of crosses the trans agenda, or sometimes even other minority groups. So in the UK, we covered up and still cover up the grooming of hundreds of girls across this country because, unfortunately, the perpetrators happen to be Muslim, Pakistani, and other immigrant communities. So, just if you're going to get raped, I think the lesson is make sure he's white. If you want any justice, white and identifies as a man.
Yeah, I mean, that situation is crazy. The fact
Mm.
that, you know, white women aren't, I mean, I don't know
It's
that
such a
all the victims
dangerous
are white.
conversation.
Well, it's like white women aren't supposed to talk about rape if the perpetrator was an immigrant, I guess, or like a man of color. That's how far gone our politics have become.
Mm. I mean, even and we know. Well, we've just had an article out over here about lesbians talking about coercive rape, and that's that's been hailed as a terrible anti-trans propaganda piece. So I guess it shouldn't really surprise us that even with children in schools, girls are subjected to the same sort of lack of justice, if you like, when it comes to being raped. If it's from a protected group, it's just disgusting.
Well, and yeah, from a protected group, but like, why are women not a protected group is probably the most obvious question.
Well, even little girls, I think, like, you know, when we have these conversations, then men go, "Yeah, I've got a daughter," as if, you know, that somehow qualifies them for thinking that women are human. And I'm not saying that all. No, I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to just stop myself from saying that. But you know, it's a thing that men do, that they suddenly realize that the world is pretty bad for women once they have a daughter and understand how men feel about women, because they've been privy to numerous conversations in which men have talked about how they feel about women. But this particular explosion in Virginia, and the fact that so many, and it's women, isn't it? It's women that have come out that were previously Democrat voting women who've actually come out against this and finally seem to have woken up.
Right, but they're all transphobic and or white supremacist women, aren't they?
I bloody hope so.
I mean, and I was really naturally. I mean, we got to cater to our alt-right base, right? So
it's where the money is. It's where the money is.
All that money. Where is it? I can't see it. I'm looking at the live chat and I'm not seeing any white supremacy money in there.
They just do it covertly. They divide
it.
themselves into 1,000 different crowdfunding contributors. That's how they do it, secretly. No, but like it's women that are waking up. I mean, I'm surprised it's taking them that long, to be honest. But when you see these school board meetings, in fact, I just watched one that's in Fairfax County, which I believe is also Virginia, quite a large area of Virginia, and it's the first time I've seen the illustrations in the books. Have you seen the illustrations in the books?
I didn't see the illustrations. I did last night. I watched a woman who was speaking at a school board meeting. Was it the Fairfax one? She was talking about two books, Lawn Boy and Genderqueer. Yeah, it was Fairfax. Yeah, she was a blonde woman, but I didn't actually see the illustrations. No.
I mean, we're talking about close-up of a boy fellating an adult male. We're talking about whatever the adult male would see if he looked down at that moment. Just numerous explicit pictures. And I just think it only makes sense if somewhere there are paedophiles who want to put this into schools, because it doesn't make sense if it's just people sleeping on the job or being incompetent. That doesn't really cut it, that you would kind of, in a child kind of illustration form. So it's not like it's a picture drawn for adults. It's a graphic picture drawn specifically in the sort of the style of a children's book. Just
what ages are these books for? Do you know?
Well, I think 4th grade, which is about 8.
It's so really strange.
The character is 10 when he talks about fellating an adult.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I haven't seen or read these books, so I really can't speak to their content explicitly, and I don't support banning books, but at the same time, it's sort of like, what's behind the choice to put these particular books into schools, and you know, it seems.
I think they're covered, they're shrouded in the pride flag. So they're all about acceptability, and it's all about inclusivity and diversity and all those other words that really are now code words for anti-women or anti-safeguarding type propaganda, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I do shudder every time I see the word inclusion or diversity. But I don't think there can be no good intention behind the actual writing of the book. It's just insane. But that it just doesn't then surprise me if your safeguarding is falling down when it comes to actual things that you can tangibly see and interpret and approve or not approve. Then it doesn't surprise me that you're then letting boys into girls' changing rooms, and then you can't actually admit that that is an absolutely terrible thing to do.
Well, and it's interesting because I think that a lot of people accuse us, well, trans activists accuse us of painting trans people as dangerous predators. And this boy, I don't think necessarily identified as trans or anything, but it does seem as though he was using these new policies around gender neutral bathrooms, around, boys being allowed to use boys and men being allowed to use whichever bathrooms, change rooms, etc. they want based on their identity. And essentially what's happened is the thing that women and feminists warned would happen, right?
Well, I mean, I think that the fact that whether or not he identifies as trans, I find troubling anyway, because it's not, as far as I'm concerned, I don't really care. He's, however he identifies, he's a boy in a girl's space, and the logical findings of boys in girls' spaces is it makes girls uncomfortable and unsafe. But the other thing is, anybody, whether they fully believe that they are the opposite sex, born in the wrong body, and are absolutely drowning in that ideology, the fact that any man or boy goes in a girl's space, I think, makes them automatically predatory, because it's not a space that makes anybody else feel comfortable once they're in it. And I know that that's it probably makes me sound like I'm saying all trans people are predators. I'm just saying, actually, if you're male and you go in a female space, I think that makes you predatory.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm really glad you said that. And I've said that online too, and been sort of like, or in an article or something, I can't remember, but like, what kind of man wants to go into a woman's space where he knows that he's going to be making women uncomfortable? Or what kind of boy wants to go into a girl's space where he knows that he's going to be making girls uncomfortable? Like, that is predatorial.
Yeah.
That is, rapey, if you want to use that word. Like, that you're making women or girls, or women and girls, feel unsafe, and you do it anyway. What does that mean? What is, like, to me, that signals either that you're a predator or an exhibitionist, but either way, that you enjoy, not just that you're okay with, but I think that you actually enjoy making women and girls feel uncomfortable and feel unsafe, and to have to just, and now because of this like political context, to have to not say anything and to have to put up with it.
I know. I do really think it is all part of the arousal of men who are autogynephiles. And let's face it, autogynephilia doesn't suddenly pop up when you're like 55. It might actually just be that you can't suppress it anymore. But autogynephiles, you're sort of formed in your formative years, your fetishes. And so it's weird, isn't it? Often in these conversations, not obviously with you, and not with many of the people that I choose to converse with, but in online, especially conversations in this movement, women have to constantly pretend that we don't know that most of the men that do dress as women and use our spaces are perverts. And we have to sort of pretend that it's some sort of act of courage and bravery, and we don't want to be mean, and you get everybody announcing, well, I'm not against trans rights. Well, frankly, if trans rights include coming into women's spaces, I really am quite against those rights. I'm really quite, defiant in the fact that I want to say it.
Well, and what do trans rights mean? What is trans rights? I mean, people say trans rights in a vague way intentionally, or they say trans rights are human rights. They say that intentionally so that it seems as though it's a fight against discrimination. That would traditionally mean a fight for access to employment or housing or healthcare. And in reality, of course, what trans activists have been fighting for, whether or not they want to admit it, is access to, well, male access to women's spaces, because I don't think there's very many females who identify as trans who are fighting really hard for access to male spaces. Why would they want that? But access to change rooms, access to bathrooms, access to female prisons, access to women and girls sports, which I don't know how anybody could in good faith frame that as a right. What do you need access to a girl's bathroom for if you're a boy? What do you need access to a women's change room for if you're a man? I suppose they would say because they're going to be subject to violence if they go into a men's washroom. So they need to go to the girls' washroom to rape girls. Not that they all want to do that.
We know that it's
twisting
not
myself
really
into
about
knots here. It's like, wait, I forgot. This isn't predatorial. Never mind.
We know that it's not about trans men, don't we? So-called trans men. We know it's not about women fighting to get into men's spaces, because women have been trying to do that for a long, long time. And it took, and still, we still haven't got there. So we know that so-called trans men and women who call themselves men, we know that they're just convenient for men who call themselves women. And the men are using those women because you're absolutely guaranteed that if it was just about those women wanting to be seen as men, which is what feminism, I guess, has been fighting for, to be seen as human, and that hasn't really been fully actualized. Well, maybe it did, and then it just went so far forward and weird so very, very quickly that, men have parasitically invaded the feminist movement, and now most of it seems to be about men.
Yeah. So do you think that's what trans men is about? The idea that, it's not just men wanting to transition to or identify as women. It's also that, women want to transition to become men. Do you think the root of that is around justifying male transition or something of the like?
I think so. I think the children definitely is. I think men are quite happy for children to transition, because then we can't talk about it being a fetish, and they are handy collateral in their fight. Let's face it, most of the men that are fighting for supposed trans rights, they've never fought for anybody's rights ever in their lives. It's not, those men haven't been out talking about equal pay for women, or talking about no rape in marriage, or the rights of women throughout the globe. They don't care about women's rights until they so-called became women. And then all of a sudden they're compassionate, empathetic individuals. It's just all a nasty act. And I'm always quite surprised, even when people on our side try to pretend that, Julia Long asked that question in that conference to Jane Clare Jones, where she said, you are talking about gender identity extremists, but what is a moderate? What is a gender identity moderate? Somebody that takes hormones to have fake breasts, or tucks their penis, or pretends to go around the world when they're like 6'5" and call themselves Sarah. How is that a moderate position?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that I think people like us are sort of tut-tutted when we say that it is predatorial, because, they're like, well, there's lots of, trans people who aren't fighting for access to women's spaces, who are just, normal, like, people trying to live their lives. And it just makes us look bad when you say this act is kind of perverted and predatorial. And I don't really care anymore. And I doubt you do either. But I guess it pisses me off, because I'm like, don't you see that playing their game and trying to be nice doesn't win, and it doesn't work, and there's nothing nice? Look at what's happened to J.K. Rowling, who was very nice about what she said, and look at what's happened to Margaret Atwood, who didn't even say anything, and it appears to be against us because she keeps calling us TERFs. And she's been attacked online en masse for sharing an article by a self-identified trans woman who's critical of toxic trans activism. And good, be critical of toxic trans activism, but she's not even said men aren't women. She's not even said something as controversial as biological sex is real. So I don't know what these people think they're going to achieve, I suppose, by justifying the concept of transgenderism in the first place. And I don't think that all people who identify as trans are perverted or predatorial. I just think that the main aim of trans rights activism is to allow male predators to get away with it, again, whether they know it or admit it or not. I don't know. Do you think they know it? Do you think this is intentional?
I think abusers do know they're abusive. I think I've talked to enough trans widows and listened to their testimonies about how they're treated. And it's very much like any other abuse victim. There's coercive control, there's the erasure of boundaries, there's a pushing of boundaries, and it's incremental. And it's only when these women are sort of right at the end of what they can cope with that they realize that this has been a really long journey of incremental abuse. So I think those men are aware. I also heard somebody talk about the sort of the cycle of domestic violence. And if you just pull that right out and look at it sort of in a really broad way of trans activism and abuse and the erosion of boundaries and all of those things, they are really similar. So I don't think someone like, is it Grace Laverty, who's sort of, and there's another guy, and they both talk about almost the fantasy of being submissive and sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. They've got to know that they're abusive men, right? That can't be a surprise to them. They can't think when they're enjoying making women feel uncomfortable that actually they're righteous and nice people.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I'm never totally sure how much of it is delusion connected to mental illness, or I mean, there's very obvious abusers that I see who are loud and prominent in the trans activist movement. That Charles Clymer guy, what is his? I don't remember what. Charlotte.
Yeah.
See, that wasn't, I'm not intentionally dead naming. I just couldn't remember the female name he wants to use.
He doesn't deserve the name Charlotte, though, does he?
No, of course not.
He was a toxic feminist, wasn't he? Before he identified as trans, I'm sure there were loads of stories about him being quite dodgy when it came to his behavior around women.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to his Me Too moment that I'm sure is going to come soon, although maybe it'll be swept under the rug on account of his identity, just like what happened in Virginia. That seems like pretty common. But, to me, his behavior is so obviously abusive and domineering and narcissistic, and I'm positive that he knows exactly what he's doing. I think that his transition was an intentional choice to weasel his way back into having a platform and a voice, because he had been canceled essentially because of how he was behaving to women in feminism, and because he was trying to dominate and he was being verbally abusive and so on and so forth in feminism. So he got canceled, and then he miraculously came back as a woman, and he had to be accepted. And, he has access to Democrats throughout the US. He has access to really, really powerful people and is treated with respect and listened to by those really, really powerful people, and has this massive platform, and people just pretend like nothing is.
Yeah. Let's face it, a woman looking like Charles Clymer would not be getting ahead in America and getting access to all those places. I mean, and I'm not even being unkind. I'm just saying that a woman that looked that masculine, I don't think they'd be getting on that far. Certainly if they'd had any hint of scandal. I mean, scandal for American women wrecks their entire careers. Even if they are the victim of something, they don't seem to be able to get over it, whereas he skipped over really appalling behaviour. I mean, you mentioned Margaret Atwood. I want to return to her, because what I find really interesting is clearly her whole that whole book, that one book that she's written, because obviously she hasn't written any others. But that book she wrote, how does she get to that, where that fundamental understanding of really right to the roots of what can oppress women? How can she then not get the whole trans thing? I don't know. You probably
I don't
know
know.
writing better than me.
I mean, I no, I mean, I don't understand, and I don't understand why, because she's intelligent. So I don't understand why women like Margaret Atwood, Catherine McKinnon, Gloria Steinem go along with this, because they have nothing to lose. They're not trying to build a career. They're not trying to build a platform. They have lots of money. I think Catherine McKinnon's probably retired at this point. I don't know for sure. Gloria Steinem certainly doesn't, she's in her 80s, and these women have the freedom really to say whatever they want to say. There's lots of women around the world who feel they don't have the freedom to say whatever they want to say because they'll lose their jobs, which will impact their families, or because they'll lose their platforms or whatever. But these women have nothing to lose, and I can't figure out if it's that they really truly don't get it, which I find really hard to believe, because again, they're not stupid women, or if they're just trying to maintain some kind of social currency or something. I don't know.
Or a family member or a close friend has a trans kid. I think
Oh,
that's always a possibility, that there is some sort of personal connection in which they've listened to the plight of some poor, vulnerable person who identifies as trans, and then is convinced that that must be the same for everyone.
okay. That's a good point that I hadn't considered. Or that that they don't want to offend whoever this family member is. Maybe they have like a sister or cousin, or, somebody in their family's married to somebody and they have a trans kid. And so if they say that, they'll be ostracized from the family, or it will certainly be very awkward in any case. I
Still doesn't make
mean,
sense. It still
yeah.
makes no sense whatsoever. I think they skip. I think maybe a lot of women on our side skip the power of a fetish as well. I really do think if I this a long time ago, when we had 3 channels, TV channels when I was growing up, and then when Channel 4 started, which was it must be about 30 years ago. They sort of had dodgy programs, and one of them was all about fetish. And one man would go to this madam's house, and his fetish had sort of translated from wherever it was as a normal sexual thing into just the pain element. So he quite liked having his genitals smashed in a toilet seat, and that was it. But his compulsion to want that, whatever the trigger was in his brain that had sort of leapt from that to this end result, I think because many women don't have those sort of compulsions or anything like a fetish, I think we find it really difficult to understand just how the desire for that, which compels many of these AGPs, is really, really strong, and will shape their whole lives. Not saying they're not related to paedophilia, but there are famous paedophiles and men that get involved with the church for their entire life, become priests for their entire lives, so they can have access to children. Or we had Jimmy Savile, who was a terrifying predatory paedophile, and had sex with dead people, was into necrophilia, and he crafted his entire career out of a way to do these terrible things. So I don't think it's beyond reason to think that some of these men are just crafting this entire movement out of a desire just to exercise their fetish.
Well, and I think that you're right that women don't understand, and I think that's probably why so many women are going along with and supporting trans activism and these policies and this legislation that's being passed all around the world, and thinking, oh, these people must be really marginalized people. They're just people who are, struggling for their rights, because a woman, for the most part, I don't think could possibly imagine that it would be a fetish, because women.
You are going really slow. I can see the counter, so I don't think it's me. I think it's you, Megan.
Did you lose me?
I'm still losing you. So your hair's very romantically kind of slightly blowing in the breeze, though. So it's all good. Have a look in the chat to see if that's better. You're back. Can you hear me?
Am I back?
You are back. Yeah.
Now we've lost Kellie-Jay.
Oh, am I freezing?
Okay, hold on. Just give me a sec here.
Okay. It's just me, guys. Oh, is it just Megan that keeps freezing, or is it both of us? Both good now, and now, yeah.
Hi, sorry.
Okay.
I just had to switch my connection. Mexico Wi-Fi, always an adventure. So sorry. So I mean, continue what I was. Yeah, like I don't know exactly where we cut off, but I was saying that like I think that women have trouble understanding or acknowledging that maybe this movement, right, might really be a predatorial, abusive movement, because a woman can't relate to that. A woman, I don't think, can relate to going through all that just to justify or their fetish or something, or have their fetish validated, or be able to operate in that way in public. So much of this is about exhibitionism, right? Where it's like you have this fetish, but it's not that you have the fetish, it's that you want everyone to look at your fetish and see your fetish, and you want people to feel uncomfortable around your fetish.
Yeah, which is part of the fetish. So it's like a narcissistic fuel. I also wonder, I do wonder though, like clearly there are online communities of furries where there are sort of pedophiles that operate within that. I'm not saying that the little misfit kids that start getting into furries are pedophiles at all, but it is an easy access to vulnerable kids for pedophiles. But I do wonder, so some of the more prolific trans rights activists on Twitter, some of the known names, which I won't name because I loathe to ever give them any attention. But what's interesting, I wonder if they all recognize themselves in each other. So if you've got two, one's a little bit wealthier, so got a little bit more facial surgery. I wonder if they converse as if they are both kind of keep up the pretense that they're both women, or whether actually there is an acknowledgement between them, those men, when they're on their own or in conversation, that actually they all know that none of them are women. And I
wonder.
I guess it's the same as, you have pedophile rings, you have men that get together in units to rape. They can sometimes operate in gangs and do the most depraved things. I don't know if women do that, or if we do, I don't think we do it in the same numbers as men. I wonder what that is about the male psyche, that actually they can do terrible things and acknowledge each other doing really terrible things, and they can bypass it. I mean, if you just look at some of the jihadis and some men even from the UK that went over and were beheading people, and knowing the people all around them, knowing that they were beheading people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't understand it either. I mean, I don't understand what it is that drives men to behave in this way, in a way that doesn't seem to drive women in similar ways. I've never really found an answer to that, because it's true that men can do I'm not going to say that women can never be abusive, because there are women who are abusive, and there are women who have sexually abused kids. But in general, for the most part, it is majority men who behave in kind of sadistic and sexually abusive ways. And I don't know what it is, and feel okay with that. Like you said, I mean, there's obvious things like the kinds of porn that men will watch, and that they'll go to see prostitutes, and that they'll go to strip clubs where they know, or they should know full well. I think a lot of men are in denial or lie to themselves. They should know full well that those women and girls that they're buying sex from, that they're paying at strip clubs, are, for the most part, not all, for the most part, women who don't have a lot of power and choice in their lives, that aren't enjoying dancing for them, that aren't enjoying having sex with them, that they don't want to be there, which is an abusive thing. If you're having sex with somebody and you know for sure that they don't want to have sex with you, and you continue to do it, I mean, what kind of person does that? But they seem to manage to continue to do it, just as, these men in the trans movement feel okay about accessing women's prisons, and making those women feel uncomfortable walking into change rooms. There was that incident at the spa in the US where that guy went in there and obviously was making the women and girls in there uncomfortable, and obviously didn't care.
No.
Or maybe enjoyed it.
Yeah, enjoyed it. I think he's done it before. It's really funny, because we do know that voyeurism and exhibitionism is I did some research ages ago about voyeurism and changing. It was when changing rooms were changing over here into sort of gender neutral, or use whatever changing room you want, in about 2018, 2019. And I foolishly put into Google voyeurism, thinking about the crime, and it just came up with about 600 million pages of porn sites, because voyeurism is like a porn genre. So then why we have to pretend that actually that isn't part of these men in women's spaces, that it isn't like low-level sexual crime. And then obviously we had the Sarah Everard killer, who had been let off for flashing. So the exhibitionism is also kind of part of a sexual gratification, and abusive sexual gratification for these men. So why we have to pretend, just because a man sticks on a bad wig and calls himself Sarah, that suddenly the things that he's doing is no longer sexual crime, is absolutely bonkers.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think it was that the rape in Virginia was swept under the rug? Why did, what I read was, so it happened in May, and the superintendent knew about it, but then in June, I think at a school board meeting or something like that, he said there had been no sexual assaults at the school in the bathrooms. And then it was reported last month in October that, in fact, he had reported the assault to the school board, but that they hadn't made that public information. So they had kept it under wraps. Why do you think that happened?
I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same rationale as why women didn't come forward to talk about Bill Cosby, or how the fact that in America, a Black woman is 3 times more likely to be killed in her own home by a partner or ex-partner than a white woman. And it's that protectionism. So when we look at racism in the past, then crimes that Black men have committed, say 20 years ago when this was happening, would be used to say that all Black people were XYZ. And so those same mistakes are now being used as if you talk about male violence in men that identify as women, then you're doing the same. You're kind of, you're tarring an entire community with those sort of singular crimes, which is what they've said about lesbians who have been victims of sort of coercive rape. And I think that's why. So what they wanted to do in that school, they've been totally captured. They're really super, super woke. So if you then say, actually, the boy in our school that did wear a skirt and use girls' changing rooms did actually sexually assault someone, maybe in their heads they're saying, well, if we tell them about that, then they're going to be prejudiced against all trans students, and none of those boys can use girls' changing rooms. I think that's the only explanation. I don't think they really hate girls, or they don't really know that they hate girls. I don't think they know that they want to obliterate all safeguarding. I don't think they know any of those things about themselves unless they really are sort of sociopaths. So it can only be that it's this thing where minority groups are, jihadis characterize the entire global Muslim population. I think it's that sort of logic. It's the same reason why grooming gangs, we couldn't possibly talk about grooming gangs because it was racist.
I read last night that Senator Tom Cotton had said, I didn't know this, but had said the Loudoun, I don't know how to say, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say Loudoun County, yeah. Thank you, sorry. School board covered it up because it would interfere with their transgender policy during Pride Month.
I mean, it's just, I think more and more and more of this stuff is going to come out, and it's going to become difficult to ignore. And the shame of it all, I don't think it's a shame if there are no more kids in America calling themselves trans. I think that would be a moment to celebrate globally, because what's happening to kids in America is disgusting and barbaric and, permanent. But I do think the backlash is going to be nasty, and it will take along with it many other things that are so-called progressive. So it might mean that people are genuinely more racist. The more we tell everybody that everybody is racist, actually people might actually come out of it being more racist, like literally racist. And people might just turn against the whole of the LGBT and feminism, because they will link all of those things, that this is what brought this stuff forward, and therefore everybody will be punished. And my biggest fear is that the only way we escape from this chaotic, irrational untruth is by returning to a really prescriptive religion. Because I think at the end of all this chaos, I think people are going to really need something that is more cohesive and, not tangible, because I'm an atheist, so I don't think religion is that tangible, but the structure of religion, I think, will be something that the human race will require.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. I think that the backlash that's happening is turning people against a lot of it, anything that's associated with woke politics or progressive politics, including anti-racism, including feminism, including the LGBT movement, including, things like socialism and the ideas attached to socialism, because you lose trust in those people. These people have lied to everyone. They're covering up crimes. They're covering up violence. They're pushing through dangerous, nonsensical policies. So I think it's a natural response. Yeah. It's an unfortunate, but it's a natural response that you'd be like, I don't really believe anything you say. So if you're talking to me about racism and racism in America, I don't know if I believe you, because you also just told me that there's an epidemic of violence against trans people, which isn't true.
Yeah.
And
Have
that
you
they
seen
need
any of
access
the
to girls'
Rittenhouse?
change rooms to protect them. Sorry, what
Yeah.
was that?
Have you seen any of the Rittenhouse trial?
No.
It's a perfect example of just what the hell is going on in America. I think that, and the new Biden's daughter's diary, in which she says that she had inappropriate showers with her dad, and she thinks
What?
she's a
I
victim.
don't know anything about this. Tell me what's going on.
So, the Project Veritas guy got his house raided by the FBI for a diary that's not really a diary because it's a fake diary, but it's so important that the FBI have to retrieve it, right? And it's apparently Biden's daughter, and she talks about being abused as a child, and she talks about showers with her dad, and then she puts in commas, which is probably inappropriate. And that's not even talked about in the news. Now, if any Republican politician, had any hint of that, that's all anybody would be talking about. And quite rightly, I think everybody should be talking about that if it's being covered up. But then you've got the Rittenhouse, so that 17-year-old boy who goes out in Kenosha, he takes a gun. CNN reported that he took a gun across state lines, and he didn't. I'm not saying any good things about guns because we don't have them in the UK, and I'm quite happy about that. But the whole trial is just basically nothing that the media said. Like, this kid was defending himself. The guy he shot in the arm went to pull the gun on him first, and he shot him in the arm. And the guy, I think, is a felon, so a convicted felon. And actually, he shouldn't even have a gun. Any convicted felons aren't allowed guns, so he shouldn't have had a gun. He's not been arrested or charged for admitting he's got a gun. And then the guy that was shot, I think he was also pretty dodgy. But whatever you think about those riots or that night or whatever, you've got the FBI that have actually filmed the whole thing, and they've apparently lost the tape. It's a very scary thing, I think, to be in the so-called land of the free when you are watching something that is so outlandishly kind of not justice being served up in the courts. I think it's really quite unsettling.
Yeah, and when you're seeing justice being politicized, so justice is only allowed to happen based on the preferred political narrative, which is not justice at all. It's certainly not equality. You know, it's not any of these things that these people claim to support: inclusivity, diversity, equality, rights.
Can you remember the Catholic? Can you remember I think my first big turning point in a kind of what? Besides the fact that people are called women have penises and kids should be trans. But that Catholic boy who stood still when the supposed elder, who actually was quite a dodgy man himself, had done that drum in his face, and the kid just smirked. And the way the media sort of played that whole episode out, I just thought, God, that's really dishonest. There's something deeply, and I'm sure you and I have mutual friends who both were like, oh, he was sneery, he was pro-life, he was disrespectful. And I'm
This
like,
little white
I think
supremacist.
he just stood still. I think he just stood still. That's what he did. He just stood still with a teenage smirk of awkward or even arrogance on his face. I don't know.
I don't even think it was arrogance, because I think if I had been in that situation, I would have felt like so uncomfortable and confused that I probably would have just been like, okay, I guess I'll just stand here until this guy's done. Like, what would you do? I mean, you're a kid. Like, you're not confident. You don't know how to respond to that kind of situation.
No.
What would the response be anyway? Like, what else would you do except stand there?
That was a proper sort of watershed moment, I think. And the fact that, he was a school kid, but he was treated as if he was some sort of white supremacist, white pointy hat wearing elder himself. Just very strange. And then you make some kids not remotely responsible for what they're doing, or even adults. and then these kids are supposed to act like sort of mature adults who know exactly what to do in that situation to avoid any bad PR. Just there's something really, I think there's something really rotten in American media, both news and narrative, and we've got it over here.
Yeah, and that the Covington situation, I think, was a big turning point for me also because it was revealed how the media had skewed it, and how all progressives online had skewed it, and it just, the whole thing turned out to be a lie. And once that happens, once you realize that all these people are lying to you, that the liberal media, if you want to call them that, they're obviously not liberal, I just don't know how else to describe them in a way that people will understand. Once you realize that the liberal media is lying to you and that they're just serving up a political narrative and nothing else, they're not giving you the facts, they're not giving you the science, they're not giving you the truth, they intentionally leave out any information that's inconvenient. I mean, and that, progressives are going along with it. It's like, I don't want anything to do with any of these people. And I don't believe anything the liberal media tells me. And this has all happened again, not just with regard to the trans stuff, although the fact that, the New York Times is promoting the idea that men can become women, and, that kids should be transitioned, and that this guy that Biden nominated, Rachel Levine, is literally female. They didn't even do, I mean, it's just as offensive, but they didn't say a woman. They literally said female, the first female. I mean,
what a man. I mean, woman, man. What a man. What a crazy, crazy thing. I walked past, when I lobbied with Wolf, I walked past the sort of, some of those offices of those sort of people in Capitol. Now, I'm guessing it's not admirals in Capitol, but there are army and various military offices. And you just think, come on, you people, what you're trained to do is literally kill. That's what your whole purpose is, to be the people in the United States of America that if you are under threat, you will literally kill people. And now you're talking about, like we've had it over here as well, inclusive recruitment and stuff. And you're like, you kill people. You can't be that bothered about someone's pronouns. You kill people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just a lie. I don't think anybody is bothered by misgendering. I don't think that any of these people who identify as trans or non-binary or whatever they identify actually feels hurt or endangered when people don't use their preferred pronouns. I think it's just that, I do think that it's that these people are domineering, abusive people, and they just enjoy berating people.
Although we did a protest outside of the Lancet, which for you and your foreign viewers, the Lancet is a medical journal, and it's a really well-respected, very old medical journal. And we did a protest outside of there because they said either bodies or people with vaginas instead of women. And there were some schoolgirls, posh schoolgirls, from a local school walking by. And some of the women, all like, I mean, I was probably not very old there. Like, there were quite a lot of women who were like in their 50s and 60s talking to these girls, these schoolgirls. And one of them basically said, "You're a girl," to this, I don't know, teenager. And she absolutely bawled her eyes out in the street in front of people. Now, my kids, I don't think you could catch them crying at school. I never would have cried at school. I mean, unless I broke a bone, I don't think I would have cried at school. But they are being led into, and we're not talking about orthogynophile men, but I do think that these kids are being led into a world in which disagreement is genuinely hurtful. Look at Kathleen Stock at Sussex University and those kids. They they probably do genuinely think, if you disagree with them, that it's really, really hurtful, and you are, well, it's because they've never had a hard day in their lives, but you are doing something terrible to them. These
Yeah.
kids that have constantly had yes the whole way through their lives.
Yeah. They don't know how to handle disagreement.
Yeah.
And I think that it genuinely does trigger them. I mean, I suppose I would differentiate between like an accidental misgendering, let's say, somebody just says she and doesn't mean it, versus somebody saying, or he, somebody saying, no, you're not a girl, you're a boy, or no, you're not a boy, you're a girl, because they wouldn't know how to respond to that because they've been told, no, you really are a boy. And it's really important that everyone around you calls you a boy and acknowledges that you're a boy and treats you like a boy. And if they don't do that, that's a really horrible, cruel, hateful, dangerous thing, and you will fall apart.
Well, I, as you well know, because I've mentioned them many a time, but I've got 4 kids, and I've also helped in schools like when my children were younger, and they don't say the word no. I don't know what it's like in America. I suspect it's from America that we have this stupid idea, but they will have like colors, so red, yellow, and green, or amber. And if a child's misbehaving, they might hold an amber light, an amber card up, or numbers 1 to 5. But what they don't do is say, stop that right now, or no, or how dare you, or if you do that again, or any of those things. One of my kids was picked on, and rather than the kid just being told, stop doing that, if you do that again, you won't have playtime, they have to have a sit down, and the child has to be talking to my kid about what it is. And there's I think sometimes little kids and big kids need shouting at and telling off. And we've just stopped doing that. I mean, I have not stopped doing that. I'm a terrible parent. But that's like in schools and everywhere. It's about quick fix, urgent self-esteem issues, which I don't think it has the end result of actual telling a kid off and making that just a very definite, finite thing. I think that is better for self-esteem than these constant kind of top-ups and worried about damaging self-esteem. I think that actually is really dangerous.
Well, you should get used to being told no, and you should get used to people challenging you and people disagreeing with you, and you should get used to people not being nice. The overemphasis on preventing kids from being bullied. I don't want kids to actually be bullied, but I don't know, that kind of thing is character building, and you should know that not everyone's going to be nice to you in your life, and you need to know how to deal with that. Like, some people are genuine assholes, and some people aren't, like me. What if they encounter me at some point? Are they going to fall apart? That people aren't going to coddle you, and that people absolutely shouldn't coddle you. I've as like an adult woman who is confident and doesn't really give a shit if people like me or not, and I don't have the energy to go around being nice to everybody. I just don't care. I'm not going to go out of my way to be mean, but if I don't like somebody, I'm not going to suck up to them. I don't want to coddle people. I don't want to be worrying about other people's feelings. And and I meet people in my life, most of whom are women, I'll be honest, but who can't, who I think are offended by me or shocked or whatever, just because I say what I think. I'm sure you have these experiences too. And
no, everyone really likes me.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. That
so
must be
popular.
nice.
You probably just don't hear about it.
How did you manage that? You must be a really nice person.
I'm so nice.
But they want to be coddled. They're upset if I'm having conversations about things that they don't want to talk about. They're upset if I have opinions that they don't like. And I don't give a shit. To me, I'm like, well, then don't hang out with me. You can go walk over there then. But they're shocked. They're like, oh, wait, because they're so used to people tiptoeing around them. And that's, all this anti-bullying stuff, I think, kind of creates these people who don't know what the real world is like, and really will feel personally attacked or personally offended or personally hurt when someone says something mean to them or says something offensive around them, or, you know, says something that, you know, or disagrees with them or something like that.
Well, there's a thing, isn't there, that, you know, kids will say that they're being bullied, and it transpires that they've probably just annoyed all of their friends and they don't want to play with them anymore. So you're like, well, what did you do? You know, what did you do? Often, if my kids sort of, well, they don't now because my youngest is 13, but when they were younger, if something had happened at school, I'd always ask, what did you do? But then I did watch my kids go to a very middle class school in Bristol where nobody queued up. And these were like well off, nice kids, but nobody queued or waited in line for anything. They just totally rushed to the front of every single queue. Just
Rude.
Sharp elbows.
Rude.
But,
I mean, my parents blame me for everything too. If I ever complained about, like, I grew up in a co-op, so there was tons of kids around all the time, tons of families, which means we were constantly having fights or getting in conflicts or whatever. But if I came home and I complained about one of the other kids across the way or one of the kids at school, they'd be like, well, what did you do? You know, I was never pitied. I never got to be the victim. And I found it quite unfair when I was older. And then in retrospect, I was like, oh, this is probably a good thing.
what is a co-op?
A co-op? Oh, sorry. Like, it's like social housing. It's a co-op. It's like housing that's subsidized by the government. It's for poor people. But it was nice. I had a great childhood. I don't want to be. It wasn't like the ghetto. It's just like
we just call that council houses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I was sort of thinking, is that like, did you grow up in some sort of kibbutz?
No, a housing co-op. I grew up with working class people.
Yeah, me too. Just not in a shared space. But
yeah.
Like, weird about kids. The whole, you just can't have these. It's a bit that it's like the pronoun stuff, right? So the pronoun stuff is this demand and the misgendering, but the sort of the demand that anyone really cares about you. You know, I think the hard lesson is when you grow up that actually very few people genuinely care about you at all or are interested in you. I recently was in a conversation where somebody, you know, I've got 4 children. I don't show the pictures of my kids. I don't think anybody's particularly interested. I love them very, very much, and so does my husband. But we know that the people that are interested in our children are really limited. Even people that we know well are not interested in our kids. And so it's bizarre that this whole thing about what you must call me when I'm not there. No one cares about you, kids. That's what they need to learn. Nobody is interested in how you feel about yourself, what you do with your day, what you call yourself, what you want other people to think of you, because nobody's thinking about you at all. They don't care.
It's true. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, I don't care about any of my friends' kids at all. I'm not exaggerating. It's not interesting. They're not my kids. Like, I understand why people care about their own kids, but I don't care about other people's kids. I mean, people barely even care about their friends. Like, never mind their friends' kids.
Can you imagine being like 18 or 19 and thinking that anybody actually cares what your pronouns are or what you call yourself
or how you feel about your gender?
Yeah, all of like how you identify. Most people don't even care what your name is or whether or not you ate a meal in the last week, let alone some inward kind of conflict you might be having about your gender. Sod off.
Yeah, it's all, I mean, it's this, and that we all pretend to care, about narcissism, and that we're encouraging narcissism in kids and in all of these people. It's just so, it's super boring. It's so self-indulgent, and it's just, it's not interesting. I mean, it's not. Why would it be interesting to anybody what you like to wear? Like, why would I be interested to know that you actually don't like pants, you like skirts? I don't give a shit. Who gives a shit? Like, can you imagine announcing to the world, like, my story, I'm coming out with my truth, and this is a really important thing. I'm coming out. I actually like having short hair.
Oh my God, you're so brave. But I also think it also is about, it used to be if you wanted to be known and if you wanted to achieve something, you'd have to do something, like really do something. And now you just have to sort of announce something and do nothing for it and get all this attention and these accolades about being brave or courageous for what? Saying that actually, despite the fact that I've got a penis and testicles and a really hairy chest and hair sprouting out the whole of my face, I'm actually called Juliet. I mean, that is not an act of bravery at all.
No, not in any way. And I mean, what's good about this, if anything, I mean, it's not good, but it's amusing for me. I'll just say I'm enjoying it, is that, this issue has caused people to turn against the Democrats, like Republicans are winning over Democrats because of this bullshit. And this happened last week in Virginia, of course, when this Youngkin guy beat out the Democrat in the election for the governorship of Virginia. And until this year, no Republican had won a statewide election in Virginia for 12 years. And all of a sudden, I mean, what could possibly be happening? I mean, for sure, the Democrats should just double down and keep on about all of these woke politics and identity politics.
Well, you hope. What I would hope if I had been a Democrat is that actually this is a wake-up call, but I don't think it will be. I think there's going to be numerous defeats before they finally realize what's going on. But there's always been this thing about the left and right, and whether it's the left and right doesn't really matter what is genuinely left or right. But the so-called left and right in America and the so-called left and right in the United Kingdom, and I suspect it's the same in Canada, is that actually I never realized just how manipulative and dishonest the left were. Like the right almost seem like, this is what we are, this is what we care about, and you either agree with us or you don't, and this is our rationale for doing it. And this is, even if it's let's dismantle our wonderful NHS, right? I've met people who might talk, not many people on the right in this country want to do that, but maybe some elite people on the right would like to make it private. But they've got a good argument for it. Now, I don't agree with them at all, but they won't pretend that that's not what they want. They will kind of, and that isn't necessarily true for the Tories, all of the Tories, but there's just more of an argument and a evidence-based kind of analysis, even if I disagree with the end result, with the people on the right. And the left seem to just use emotional and manipulative tactics in order to elicit support. I think Candace Owens talks about how every 4 years, every time there's an election, suddenly the whole issue of race seems to bubble up. Now, that could be coincidental, or it could be totally manipulative. But it's just really weird when you drive down into the genuine statistics about what's going on in comparison to what's presented. But I don't know. Do you think Virginia is going to be the first of many? How many do you think will have to turn Republican before the Democrats wake up?
I think it'll be a trend. I mean, it does seem to be a trend already. I was reading about this last night, and it does seem that there are other Republicans winning over Democrats, and in places where Democrats usually win. And it has to do with things like this issue of pushing gender identities in schools. Parents care about their kids. They're not going to choose, well, some parents have, but most parents are probably not going to choose politics over their kids. It has to do with this attempt to abolish the police, which people are like not having at all. Like, no, I don't think that's a good idea.
Wasn't there one of the women that was like, defund the police? She got burgled or something and she calls the police. It's just,
like, I thought these men were dangerous. What are you doing calling them to your house? And you know, and again with the school issue, critical race theory in schools, which a lot of parents are not having, these, you know, like sexualized, perverted books that they're putting into schools to serve, again, a political narrative. So I do think the tides will turn, and it's not like I necessarily want Republicans in charge, but I sure as hell don't want the Democrats in charge. So I would prefer the alternative. And it's interesting and amusing to me that I think, like, a lot of these Democrats think that they can rest on the abortion issue and that women will choose the Democratic candidate because they want to save abortion, regardless of what the Democratic candidate is saying about women's rights or any other issue for that matter, what they're doing in schools and around kids and so on and so forth. And, you know, that's not going to work. I mean, it's not, a lot of feminists made that choice in the last election. They chose to support Biden because they were like, well, if we support Trump, we're going to lose abortion, which isn't true because that goes state by state.
He was the first president to be elected who was actually pro-choice. So Obama was pro-life, Biden's pro-life, or was until he wanted to run. So what I find interesting is some of our mutuals in America were celebrating Biden, you know, Trump out, celebrating Trump out. And I was like, I know that you know that the Equality Act is coming in the first 100 days. And it doesn't really matter if you haven't won the debate about abortion, which I don't actually think the argument has been won. I don't think enough Americans are convinced that abortion is a fundamental human right.
They're women. Not. There's a lot of Americans that don't support abortion, and I mean, and I, you know, this is a whole other topic. I talked to Isabella Malbon about this last week, and hopefully I'll interview Mary Lou Singleton about it because I think they have really good and interesting perspectives on this, because the fight is not just about legal or illegal abortion. And certainly that's not what's going to be what drives my vote if we're talking about actually losing all of women's sex-based rights and losing women and girls sports and losing free speech, and about, like, you know, allowing these social media corporations to dictate what we can say and what kind of information. Like, these are bigger issues, I'm sorry, than legal versus illegal abortion in some states. And you do have to acknowledge that probably like half of Americans don't support abortion. And that doesn't mean that women shouldn't get abortions. I mean, women have been getting abortions for centuries. So, like, good try. Like, you actually can't take abortion away from women. You can't do that.
Well, I think it's also turned into big business. I think as well, you can't really talk about access to abortion being a fundamental human right when actually people are making a shed load of cash out of the abortion industry, which is what it is in America. So, I think Mary Lou's probably got some really good ideas about actually taking it back to women and their doctors and their practitioners and so on. I think that might actually be better at winning the debate rather than Planned Parenthood, who now is making a killing, pardon the expression, out of not just abortion, but also puberty blockers and a variety of life-limiting and sterilizing medicines. So, I remember a long time ago, I sort of, when I first got into this debate, I was like, do you know what? I think it's going to come down to abortion or all women's rights. And I've talked to some women who say abortion, and I just don't get it, because without our language, you can't even talk about women's access to, reproductive freedom. But also there's, there's some dodgy statistics in America about who is accessing abortion, why so many women in certain communities are abortion, and the bigger conversation, which is poverty, and decent blokes sticking around and not putting their semen in any vessel that becomes remotely available.
Yeah, absolutely. I really hate to end this conversation because I think we could talk about this for hours, but I know it's late there for you, and I have to go practice punching people. So,
do you have any faces on the punch bag?
No, I'm not hateful. I'm joking.
Well, we both know that's not true.
Thank you for joining me. Let's do this again soon.
We should do it in the flesh next time.
Well, yeah. How are we allowed to do that yet?
Yeah,
are you allowed? Can you come visit me in Mexico?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, let's do that.
You really should.
I'm sure it's an absolute necessity for Standing for Women.
Yeah. I mean, it's a business expense. Really
nice to talk to you, Megan. Thank you.
It's really fun here. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. I linked to Posie's / Kellie-Jay's YouTube channel and Instagram down below this video, and subscribe to my channel. And we hope to see you soon. Have a great night, everyone.